Going into debt is usually something that's better to avoid. And in the preparedness community, the question of whether or not it's okay to go into debt in order to be more prepared for a disaster comes up quite often. And the answer is generally no. However, there are different circumstances where going into debt might be worth it. So in this video, we're going to talk about the top 5 preps that might be worth putting on credit. Hey everybody, it's Magic Prepper, and today we're talking about the top 5 preps that might be worth going into debt for. Now first and foremost, I'm not a financial advisor, so anything we're going to talk about here in this video is purely discussion, and I'm going to talk to you about my anecdotal experiences as to things I've gone into debt for in the past that are related to preparedness. So I wanted to go ahead and mention that because you should never make any financial decisions based on what I have to say. Now, the question about whether or not going into debt in order to be better prepared comes up all the time throughout the preparedness community. And it's something that needs to be addressed because most of the time the answer to those people is no. No, you shouldn't. Never do it, right? But I do think there are some exceptions to that rule. And I want to go ahead and talk about those right now. But real quick, if you've ever gone into debt in order to pick up something completely impractical from your local gun store, then hit the subscribe button below because we've probably all done it. And this one is nice and safe and unloaded, and the safety's on, and it's beautiful, okay? So let's talk about what you may want to go into debt for in order to be better prepared. This is going to be very practical. These ideas and concepts are very widespread and utilized right now in the sense of financing. It's something that we all know about, but we should consider when it comes to our preparedness. If SHTF occurs, are you as prepared as you want to be? And did you hold yourself back due to the concept of not wanting to have any debt at all? Because of course we would all love to live debt-free, but there are circumstances where some debt might actually help you quite a bit. So the first one on this list, number 1, is going to be medical, okay? Medical expenses can be very expensive, and medical itself is very important. Being able to take care of yourself and make sure that you're in proper health for any kind of a disaster situation is going to be the difference between living and dying. And this is something that you have to consider now. Now, obviously you should just take good care of yourself, but we all have issues that arise. Going into debt in the sense of financing to address those medical concerns now is not necessarily a bad idea. And I've done it for things like dental, to make sure my teeth are taken care of when I haven't had the finances available to me at the time in order to maybe extract a wisdom tooth or get a root canal or something along those lines. Well, I financed it, paid it off eventually, but in the meantime, my teeth were healthy once again, and if an emergency was to happen, I wasn't going to find myself in a very bad situation. I did the same thing with laser eye surgery. So I improved my vision and removed the need for lenses in order to see whatever might come my way during an emergency as well. And at the time, I could not afford how much it cost in order to get laser eye surgery. However, I could afford the financing, which I did do, and then I did pay off. So these are concepts that you should think about, and this applies to things that are related to surgical treatment. If you have something you've been putting off due to finances, well, imagine putting that off until the point shows up one day where you no longer have access to a surgeon or a medical facility, okay? The same thing can go to something like physical therapy, okay? If you're putting off physical therapy because there's something wrong that you know you can fix, but you just don't want to pay for that treatment, it might be something worth looking into in the sense of financing if you can't afford it right now, because getting that taken care of ahead of time could be a huge difference in your survival during a grid down SHTF, large-scale disaster situation. So these are things I wanted you to consider. That's why it's number 1 on the list, because me financing my ability to have perfect vision without having to utilize glasses or contacts, definitely worth it in my opinion. And me making sure my teeth were in proper working order and not having cavities or having, infections or something like that in my mouth to start an SHTF scenario with, definitely worth it as well. And those kinds of things, especially when we're talking about dental, when you leave them untreated, they just get progressively worse. And then the treatment eventually gets more expensive down the road. So you're actually saving money by financing it because you're avoiding the bigger cost that comes at the end of the road, okay? Wanted to mention this and bring it to your attention. Medical is something I would consider, okay? Moving on to number 2. Now this is just basic knowledge, but it's something I want you to remember is okay to utilize for a couple of reasons. And that's gonna be real estate, okay? So real estate is still worth getting into debt for. Why? Well, first off, there's a limited supply, right? We all know there's only so many buildings, there's only so many homes, and only so much land out there. And you wanna make sure you get what it is you want while you're able to, instead of always waiting until that perfect time. If you continually wait to save up the money to fully flat out purchase a home perhaps, okay? Well, in that time, what are you spending money on in order to live? Are you still living in an apartment or in another home that you're paying rent on? Is that rent money you're paying gonna be the same as the mortgage that you're trying to acquire? Maybe, and if that's the case, then why not take the wash and invest that money back into something you actually want, something that you have more property rights on, and something that you can now customize or modify to being what it is that you want. These are things to consider, okay? Real estate is not something that's a bad thing to get into. And I have bought more than one home now in my time. And the first home that we bought, when we sold it, we made money. And yes, we didn't own it flat out yet, but we still made a profit. And these are things to consider in the sense of, financial attributes that can come with the idea of owning an asset like a home, as well as the ability to prepare better. Because now in the home I'm currently in, it's financed. I did not have the money to just buy this home flat out. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. But what I will say is that I have a lot of property now. I have a home that's in a rural environment that's much further away from any turmoil that might exist. And I have the ability to prepare in the way that I always wanted to, in the sense of having larger amounts of storage, in the sense of being able to modify anything to make it into what it is that I want it to do. There's a lot of benefits to purchasing, even if you don't actually technically own it. And going into debt to own a house when you're gonna be paying rent somewhere else anyway, might be worth it, okay? And real estate, when I say that, I also apply that to property, because possibly financing enough farmland in order to raise the crops that you need in order to supply your own food supply could also be worth it depending on your situation. These are all things to consider, okay? So number 3 on the list, another very basic one, but very important to think about, okay? Because there's a lot of naysayers out there, I know this, all right? But vehicles. And when I say vehicles, I'm not limiting it to just cars and trucks and SUVs, but I also mean agricultural equipment possibly, okay? Maybe you need a skid steer to get stuff done on your property, but you can't afford it right now, but what could it provide you if you had access to one right now? And how much further would that put you in your preparation, as well as all the other things you could do with that skid steer in the meantime? These are things to consider. Having a vehicle, like a newer truck or a newer SUV or a newer car, something that's reliable. Is that reliability worth going into debt for, rather than buying something that's older that you can afford now in the sense of not going into debt, but will that vehicle get you across the country if that's the evacuation that eventually has to occur? Will that vehicle last you throughout an SHTF scenario? These are all things to consider. Yes, a 1977 Land Cruiser would be awesome to have, especially during an EMP situation, right? However, would I want that, or would I want maybe a 2013, Chevy 1500 in order to get across the country during some kind of a natural disaster? Which one's gonna last longer? Which one's gonna get me down the road further? These are things that you have to consider and think about, and also what's better for your family. Because honestly, when you have a family, it changes the dynamic of what your vehicle needs are. And yes, as much as I would like to go out and buy some old beater truck for $1,000 that I could easily work on myself, that's not gonna work for my entire family to get around in. So even if there is an SHTF event, we're not going to be able to utilize that vehicle because there's more of us than what will work for that car. These are all things you have to keep in mind. Going into debt for a vehicle, as long as you're not putting yourself upside down, is not a terrible idea and is still reasonable in the sense of preparedness, okay? Don't buy a Ferrari. That's not what I'm trying to say here. I'm just saying that reliability is a big deal, okay? So moving on from there. What's something else that might be worth going into debt for in the sense of preps? This one might be a little bit different. It's something for you to consider that might be a little bit outside of the box. Still very relevant, I guarantee it, okay? Small business. Opening a small business, running a small business, starting a small business, having your own form of income could be worth going into debt for. A small business loan attached to an LLC that you operate might be worth the additional attributes that it brings to you, okay? Understand that having a small business can open a lot of doors. Being able to generate income can be a big factor in being able to be better prepared. Having your own money is a big deal, and using that money To get better prepared is what we all are talking about doing right here, right? So being able to earn more money can definitely help you. And so getting started in earning more money and having a small business can definitely push you forward in that direction. It also eliminates the need to deal with any guidelines or restrictions or mandates that might come from an employer if you can work for yourself. And then having that small business loan that might get everything started can get you off your feet and get you the freedom you deserve to be able to work for yourself. These are things to consider. That's why a small business, something that has a return on investment, something that can actually generate more money, might be worth going into debt for. Not to mention the other benefits of a small business, okay? Could be maybe having access to wholesale items, right? Being able to stock a store full of preparedness gear, preparedness items, and survival food, and all kinds of stuff, and then being able to have it for sale for resale, but having that inventory on hand isn't necessarily the worst thing for SHTF, now is it? Anyway, moving on from there, I want you to think about that. Yeah, exactly. I know what those guys are doing, and it's not a bad idea. Anyhow, small business, not the worst thing to go into debt for, especially if it can pay you back. And the fifth thing on this list, something else to consider, and it might not be something that's on front and center for everybody's preparedness idea when it comes to going into debt, because honestly, it's just so nice to take out that Cabela's credit card and go down there and pick up a 12 gauge and just really enjoy yourself and make sure that you have that additional 12 gauge that you definitely needed and not just wanted. But I didn't put firearms on this list because I think that most of the time, especially in the sense of prepping, you can find affordable ones within a price range that's reasonable to not have to go into debt for. I'll throw that out there. But what I will say, number 5 on the list is fuel. And when I say fuel, what I mean is that fuel that you need for your home in order to survive adverse conditions, okay? Propane is a big one that a lot of people rely on, especially for heat in cold environments. Yet propane's expensive, and for some people, buying $800 worth of propane all at one time is out of the question. That might be the difference of being able to go to the grocery store that month or not, okay? But there are ways you can finance your propane purchase so you no longer have to spend $800 at one time. You can spend, $70 a month until you get to the point where you have the propane you need. These are all things that are out there and available to you, and fuel is a really big deal for preparedness. If you're in a winter storm situation and you're out of propane, you're not gonna be able to call the propane truck to show up at your door in the middle of that storm to load you back up. That's not how these things work, okay? And if you're gonna have to spend the money either way, then maybe it's something worth looking into. That whole concept can also apply to something like solar. You can actually finance solar for your home and actually get panels and everything installed, as well as a battery station and everything else in order to have that backup power or that primary power system ready to go. The issue is that it's very expensive, but it is something that can be financed, and there's a lot of programs out there that can help you finance things like solar. So having fuel or power for your home or your property can be worth that in many ways, especially before an SHTF event. Imagine financing a solar system for your home and then SHTF happens the next day. Aren't you glad you have an entire power bank system at your home right now that you don't have to rely on the grid for anymore? These are things to consider, and that's why these are the top 5, okay? I know you thought that this stuff was gonna be on that top 5. We've all done it. Don't lie to yourself, we've done it. But it's definitely not a priority, and it's definitely not something you should go into debt for when it comes to the other things that we talked about on this list. Do yourself a favor and remain as much out of debt as you possibly can. But when it comes to the things we just talked about, there are reasons as to why they may be more beneficial to acquire now rather than waiting until that inevitable sometime down the road day where you have hundreds of thousands of dollars to just buy a house with flat out. That day might never come. And if there's anything you should have learned from last year, it's that anyone's income or job or ability to generate an income is not permanent, okay? It's not fail-safe. You can easily lose that at any moment in time. And a lot of people experienced that last year. But some of those people might have been better off had they had access to some of the things that they could have gotten at the time rather than waiting and finding out that they weren't ever going to get it now. Just my opinion. Like I said, not a financial advisor, Don't make decisions off of what I'm saying, but this is all stuff that I've literally had to do in my own life. And I figured I would share it with you because I don't like the whole concept around telling everyone no, hands down, no other option, don't go into debt no matter what. Because I do think that there are times where you can leverage debt to work in your favor, and especially when we're talking about being prepared, things like owning your home in the sense of a mortgage is still better than renting somebody else's home, which is probably mortgaged too. And that's just my 2 cents. So if you have anything to add, leave it in the comments below. If there's things that you think you should finance that aren't worth waiting for, tell us about it. And if you think that you shouldn't finance anything at all, no matter what the situation, tell us about that too. And if you're one of the ones who went to that local gun store and pulled that credit card out like you know you shouldn't have, you know we're on the same side. And that's gonna be it for Magic Prepper.